birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Mr.
Metal Dude.
Happy birthday to you.
Welcome, metal enthusiasts, to another episode of The Metal Dude Abides. Tonight, we are going to wrap up the 70s and right some final wrongs. But first, before we get into this week's episode, I want to give a big, huge thank you to everyone who's watched or participated, commented on, given me a thumbs up, subscribed. Any interaction you've had with my channel, I truly appreciate it. Today is our 1-year anniversary. We've been doing this for 12 months. And I just can't tell you how much your support means to me. We have had over 8,500 views on this channel. That might be small potatoes for some channels, but for someone who just decided a year ago to come on and do a little bit of a show about heavy metal, especially older metal, I can't believe how many people have tuned in. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. It has been overwhelming. I had no idea what I was getting myself into, but I've enjoyed every second of it. And a lot of that enjoyment comes from the fact that you guys are participating. It always cheers me up to hear a comment. It always cheers me up to see someone subscribe. I'll give it a thumbs up. So keep up the support, and I'll keep on putting out these videos. As for this week's video, if you're familiar with the Terminator series, you'll know that in the very first Terminator movie, they sent a cyborg back to kill Sarah Connor and failed miserably. So they had to send a second Terminator to go out. In fact, when they went to go kill Sarah Connor, they ended up creating John Connor. You know, those time travels never really work out the way they think. Well, similar things happening today. I went back in time, went back all the way into the late 60s to start reviewing all of the hard rock and heavy metal. But I had an omission. I had a mistake. I had an oversight. And so I'm sending a second me back in time to correct it. And that correction is, tonight we're going to take a look at the best drummers and drumming performances of the 1970s. The reason is simple. If you've watched my channel, you know I'm a bit of a floozy when it comes to vocalists and guitarists. I love guitars, I love vocalists, and they tend to dominate this channel. When I talk about best musical performances, 9 out of 10 times I'm talking about guitarists. And you know I have my own special category for vocalists. So tonight, we're going to celebrate the drummers. We're going to go back to the beginning once again, go through the entire decade. In fact, I'm even going to do a little bit of a sneaky, much like Terminator 2. I'm not going to go all the way back to the beginning, but I am going to go back to the year 1969 and work our way forward through the decade of the 70s. So let's get to it. Let's go all the way back to 1969. Best musical performance for a drummer from 1969 goes to Led Zeppelin with the epic drum solo Moby Dick. Now, if you have read any drumming magazines or any drumming list whatsoever, you'll see the name John Bonham in many cases listed as the greatest drummer of all time, and if not at the very top, close to it. So when you have the number one drummer in the history of hard rock and heavy metal having their signature moment, well, it has to be win the award for 1969. John Bonham is fantastic. This is his coming out party where he's introduced to the world. This is on the Led Zeppelin 2 album, if you're interested in looking it up. And it is a spectacular way to start the list. Once again, 1969, Led Zeppelin with Moby Dick. (1970) Best Musical Performance by a Drummer. Black Sabbath, Rat Salad. 1970 was a very special year. We saw the pioneers of heavy metal, Black Sabbath, put out not one but two fantastic albums. Now, one of the things Black Sabbath does from time to time throughout their illustrious history is they would put little 2 or 3 minute musical numbers in the middle of their songs. Mostly, they were to highlight the great Tony Iommi and his guitar work. But in this one, they actually highlight Bill Ward, the drummer, and he knocks it out of the park. There is some good drumming going on in 1970, but Sabbath coming into the scene, such a great heavy sound, we had to pick this one right here, 1970 Performance of the Year, Rat Salad by Black Sabbath. In 1969, we picked a true drum instrumental. In 1970, we also picked a drum instrumental. But in 1971, we're actually going to pick the best song that had great drumming in it. And this is a very difficult choice because this is peak Black Sabbath. This is peak Led Zeppelin. Ian Paice over in Deep Purple is doing amazing things over there. And it's also, The Who is also at their very top. So who's going to come out on top? Well, when in doubt, go back to the king. 1971 musical performance by a drummer, When the Levee Breaks by Led Zeppelin. This is one of John Bonham's classic songs. He is considered by many to be the best, and this particular drumming has been the backfill and sampled by rap stars, by hip-hop stars, by you name it. People love this drumming, and so it had to be the choice. Tough year. I could have gone in various directions, but John Bonham and Led Zeppelin just squeak on through with When the Levee Breaks, 1971 Musical Performance of the Year. When people talk about the greatest drummers of all times, sometimes this man gets overlooked. 1972 Musical Performance of the Year for a drummer, Deep Purple with the song Space Trucking. Ian Paice is not often mentioned among the greats of all time, but here, Ian Paice is on a historic run. Listen, I almost gave him the award in 1970 for his work on Speed King. Go back and listen to that song. Listen to the drums. In 1971, he was doing some really groundbreaking work on Fireball and the Mule. Both years, I would say he came this close to bringing home the award. But now in 1972, the field opens up and he's a slam dunk. But keep this in mind, he was very close to winning this award 3 years in a row. That's how good Ian Paice is. I picked the song Space Trucking because listen, you could go through the entire Machine Head album and pick out your favorite tracks. But this one's a little bit of a sleeper pick, so I thought I'd bring your attention to it. Great drumming on this song. Congratulations, Ian Paice, finally moving from bridesmaid to bride. Our 1973 Best Musical Performance of the Year by a drummer goes to The Who for Love, Reign Over Me. Now, I will admit, I'm not a really huge fan of The Who. But if I were to listen to The Who, this would be the era of The Who that I would listen to. This is really their very best. And if I were to listen to The Who, it would be to listen to their drummer, Keith Moon. This guy is an absolute savage on the drums. And here, this song is an excellent example. Love, Reign Over Me is one of my favorite Who songs. It is majestic. It is powerful. But it really is, if we're being honest, it's set up to showcase Roger Daltrey's vocals. And it does. Roger Daltrey sings the heck out of this song. And then Keith Moon, at the end of the number, brings us on home, kicks in on the crescendo, and just steals the show. He can't help himself. He's that good of a drummer that even in a song that was meant to spotlight maybe one of the other members of the band, the drumming at the end of this song is unbelievable. I've always said Keith Moon doesn't play the drums, he attacks them. He has this unbelievable energy, steals the show, great Who song, and it is our 1973 Best Musical Performance of the Year. (1974) Best Musical Performance by a Drummer goes to Deep Purple for the song Burn. Many people take a look at the Deep Purple era and they focus in on the Mark II era, and that is their biggest, most popular era. But don't sleep on the Mark III era. And then once again, don't sleep on this great drummer, Ian Paice. This is when Ian Gillan and Roger Glover have left the band. In walks David Coverdale, in walks Glenn Hughes. Mark III gets underway with an absolute scorcher. I've been bragging up Ian Paice this whole show. This, to me, is his finest moment. Burn just starts to the throat and just keeps on going. And Ian Paice keeps the beat all the way through it at a breakneck speed. 1974, Best Musical Performance of the Year, Burn. (1975) just happens to have two of my favorite drumming performances of all time. One, Black Sabbath, with the song Symptom of the Universe. The other, Rush, with the song Anthem, and their new drummer, you might have heard of him, Neil Peart. But the winner this year is Black Sabbath, Symptom of the Universe. And the reason being is, while both of these songs have unbelievable drumming on them, Neil Peart is going to be awesome and dominate this category in some ways. But when you go to a tie, the tie goes to the song I like the best. And to me, Symptom of the Universe was the last great Ozzy Sabbath song. It is an all-time banger. It had to win. 1975 Musical Performance of the Year. You got it. Symptom of the Universe. And the great Bill Ward. To say that someone is the absolute best at anything is very tricky, especially when it comes to art, because we all judge. But I can say that this drummer is my favorite drummer of the 1970s. 1976 Best Drumming Performance, Rainbow, with the song A Light in the Black. Now, I know this is a year that Stargazer came out and is one of the all-time greatest songs. But it's got enough flowers. Everyone knows that song's awesome, and everybody knows that the drummer on there is awesome. But this is even a more difficult song. This is even a better song. This is even a better song to highlight the power, the speed of one Cozy Powell, my favorite drummer of all time. This guy right here, he is amazing. And he goes up against the king. John Bonham has an incredible drumming performance on Achilles' Last Stand. And it doesn't matter. Cozy Powell looks the king in the eye and says, I'm taking home the award this year. Because A Light in the Black is a phenomenal drumming solo, and was so difficult that you're not going to find live recordings of this much, because it was such a difficult number to play live that they rarely did it, unfortunately. So 1976 Best Musical Performance for a Drummer, Rainbow, with the very underrated A Light in the Black. 1977 may be the oddest, weirdest pick in the bunch. Judas Priest, Call for the Priest. You're saying, wait a minute, why is this an odd pick? Well, yes, Judas Priest is well known. But the drummer that year on their Sin After Sin album was a fellow by the name of Simon Phillips. And unless you are very steeped in Judas Priest lore, you just said, who? So here's the story. Simon Phillips joins the band and does one album, Sin After Sin. He then departs the band. Les Binks takes over. He goes on for the very heavy band Toto. But let me tell you something. I've always wondered, what's the secret to Sin After Sin? Because of the Judas Priest albums, I hear a lot of people bragging up different albums, but this one has such a feel to it. And it's when you start to pay attention to the drums where you find the secret. You see, Judas Priest has been one of those bands that at times doesn't have the best drumming, but when they fix that situation, that heaviness just explodes. Their current drummer, we'll get to him down the road, Scott Travis, is an example of you take Judas Priest and they're good, but then you put in a monster drummer and they just get better. Simon Phillips, I don't know why you went off to join Toto. Hey, listen, Toto was a big band. I'm sure you made lots of money, saw the world, but boy, what a waste of talent that is, because when I just go back, listen to this album, Sin After Sin, the great Simon Phillips takes home the award that year, and it's not even close. This is an incredible entire album of fantastic drumming. '78 award goes to Rush with La Villa Strangiato. I don't even know if I'm saying that or not. Listen, I can't believe it. I just confessed a couple of years back, Cozy Powell's my boy, greatest drummer of all time. But listen, this is an epic Neil Peart extravaganza. I don't even get Neil Peart. And when I say I don't get Neil Peart, it doesn't mean I don't like him. It means I don't begin to understand this man's genius. It's like trigonometry for drummers. Like, he's doing things I probably don't even appreciate. But this La Villa Strangiato is epic. You listen to all the different things Neil Peart's doing in this, and even me, a novice drummer, has to just stop, clap, take a bow, my friend. What an epic song. And let me tell you, I love Kill the King. I love the stuff Cozy's doing right now. Never sounded better. To beat my boy Cozy at his height, John Bonham didn't do that last year. It was one of his best. Congratulations, Neil Peart. This is well deserved. One of the great drumming epic performances in the entire decade. Finally, we wrap up the decade with a newcomer. Overkill by Motorhead. And another one of my favorite drummers of all time, Filthy Phil Taylor. Once again, I'm going to mention him because I love him. Cozy Powell does a fantastic drum on Lost in Hollywood, one of the best songs of the 70s. Of course, this is the second version of Rainbow, but Cozy Powell's still killing it. But once again, Overkill is one of the best drumming songs in the entire decade. Filthy Phil comes barreling onto the scene. And Filthy Phil and Cozy Powell have one thing in common that I really like. They both have power. They both have speed. This is my kind of drumming, folks. These are two of the greatest drummers of all time. Filthy Phil probably doesn't get a lot of credit because Motorhead never really got any recognition by anybody. But this original lineup of Motorhead, Lemmy, Fast Eddie, and Filthy Phil, one of my favorite lineups of all time. They bring home the award. They wrap up the decade one of the great ones, Overkill by Motorhead. So before we wrap up the 70s, I know maybe some of you might be asking yourself, Metal Dude, what's the point of all this? Why are we going back in time? Why are we redoing the Grammy Awards? What's the end game here? Well, to me, the end game is this. The 1970s saw some of the greatest music that was ever performed, and most of it came from the hard rock and heavy metal camp. While the Grammys was off chasing bad pop country or disco or folk, they were ignoring the majesty of rock and roll, of hard rock, of heavy metal. We just got through talking about in 1979, that was the first year the Grammys even acknowledged rock in their own category. That's how ignored we were. So let me just give you the top 10 bands who should have been amongst the most decorated bands in the land. We'll start with the mighty Black Sabbath. By my account, they should have had approximately 22 Grammy nominations and should have brought home the prize 8 times, including Album of the Year for Paranoid, Album of the Year for Master of Reality, Song of the Year for Iron Man. Those are just a few of the categories. One of the other big three bands, Led Zeppelin, who also gets approximately 22 nominations, but they actually bring home 15 wins. Now, you may be saying, well, why do they have more wins than Sabbath? If you were watching the Grammys throughout the year, you would know that Robert Plant dominated Best Vocal Performance for like 3 years running. And not only would he be winning the hard rock categories, but he would be winning the overall categories either, because none of the vocalists that the Grammys were putting up in the 70s could hold a candle to Robert Plant. But they also won Album of the Year in 1969 with Led Zeppelin 2. You could argue that they should have brought home the Album of the Year for Led Zeppelin 4. They did bring home Song of the Year for Kashmir. They did bring home Song of the Year for Stairway to Heaven. This band, and also we gave them 1969 in this count as well. That does include their first year in 69. The last of the big three, Deep Purple, actually had one more nomination, 23 and 12 wins. Again, largely because in 1972, Black Sabbath and Led Zeppelin both took the year off, and Deep Purple just brought home a truckload of gold that year, including Best Album, Machine Head, Best Song, Smoke on the Water. Ritchie Blackmore brings home a lot of instrumental awards. Ian Gillan wins Vocalist of the Year. This band knocked out of the park and got lucky because the field got cleared for them one year, and they really mopped up. Speaking of which, Ritchie Blackmore went on to form Rainbow, who had 21 nominations and 14 victories, much for the same reason that Deep Purple did. In 1976, they got a hold of a whopper with Rainbow Rising, taking home Album of the Year. Stargazer won Song of the Year. Ronnie James Dio won Vocalist of the Year. Ritchie Blackmore won for Instrumental. They really mopped up that year in 1976. So Rainbow, even though they weren't around for the whole decade, ends up with like 14 awards, just short of the nomination category for the big three. Judas Priest also gets close with 19 nominations, 6 awards. They really, Rob Halford as vocalist, they have a couple of albums that are right up there. Really good job. AC/DC, not as many, surprisingly, nominations, only 10, but bring home the gold 5 out of those 10 times, including Album of the Year for Let There Be Rock, including Album of the Year for Highway to Hell. Van Halen also with 12 nominations and 10 awards. Van Halen comes in right at the end, the last 2 years, 78 and 79, and just cleans house. Van Halen won one of the great debut albums of all time, it wins Album of the Year. They win Song of the Year. They win Newcomer of the Year. They just go crazy. Almost everything they're nominated for across those 2 years, they win. Another band that got over 10 nominations, Kiss, although they only bring home 2 awards for the album Alive. Queen, also with 12 nominations. They bring home the title 3, including Album of the Year with Sheer Heart Attack and Song of the Year Bohemian Rhapsody. And our ultimate bridesmaids, the Scorpions, who do not win a single Grammy, but are nominated 16 times because, man, the Scorpions are right on the cusp. They just run up against, these great bands. But, they got a lot of nominations for Love Drive. They got a lot of nominations for Taken by Force. Klaus is a monster in the vocal category. Gets a lot of nominations. Now you're saying, well, that's all said and good. Let me just say the reality is, out of all the bands I just listed, one single Grammy nomination. And it was for Led Zeppelin for Newcomer of the Year. That was it. We just ran off, maybe 100 nominations versus one. That's why we did the show, because that kind of gives you an indication. When you start talking Zeppelin and Sabbath and Maiden should have all had 20 plus Grammy nominations in the decade, it kind of gives you more of a sample of just how big these bands were, just how influential these bands were, just what great music they were putting out all through the decade, and deserved that credit. And again, between them, doing some quick math here, probably close to or over 30 Grammy Awards. So that's why we do this. Anyway, that's our episode. Thank you again for celebrating with me 1 year. Once again, I'll shill for my anniversary gift. Go down below, hit the subscribe button, give me a thumbs up. We're going to be back with year 2. We're going to do another year of this, and we're going to break into some really great stuff. We're going to start with the 1980s. You know how much I gush about the 70s. Well, I think I like the 80s, maybe even a little bit more, especially this early part of the decade. Some fantastic music we're going to be looking at. Also, one of the things, if you've been watching the channel, the Ghosties came in and said, hey, they gave me a great warm welcome. I did a review of the recent movie Right Here, Right Now. So as a gift to my Ghost fans, there will be some Ghost album reviews, some top 10 songs of Ghost. So more Ghost content will also be just around the corner. So you want to hear about the 80s. You want to hear about Ghost. You want to be alerted to all of the great content I'm putting out. We try to put a video out every Tuesday night. Subscribe, get alerts, become a regular. All right, once again, that wraps up my year. Thank you all again for all your support. Take care.